Let's stitch this off, and we're going to talk about how to balance stitches and what would cause your stitches to not be balanced. There's a couple of different things. You could have different thread in your loopers. You could have decorative thread, or you could not have these all the way in the tension, but this is what happens when it's not balanced. The front looks really, really good, but you can see that, the purple, which is supposed to be on the top, is actually pulling over to the back. That's an unbalanced stitch. So we're going to balance this. First thing to check is look at your tension settings. If the upper looper thread's pulling over to the back, like this, then you need to either decrease the tension on the lower looper, which is where our green thread is right now, or you might need to increase the tension on the upper looper. So look at your tension settings and look at what thread. So in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and balance out, and we should have a perfect stitch. So let's go ahead and just stitch over top of this swatch. And there's our balanced stitch again. Now, if you have the opposite where the green thread is pulling over to the top, then you're going to do the same thing, but you're probably going to have to loosen your upper looper tension. All right, so we've covered balanced stitching. Let's talk about something else that can happen, and that is what we call cup stitches. And what happens with cup stitches is this. You have a cutter, and it pretty much sets the seam width. You can increase that, depending on what fabric you're using, all the way up to 7 millimeters. But sometimes 7 millimeters is just a little bit too wide for what fabric you're using. Okay, what you get is an effect that's called cupping, or a little bit of rippling in the seam line. When you have something like this, where you have that rippling here, or it's cupping towards you or towards the back, that means that your cutting width is just a little bit too wide, and you need to decrease it for the fabric that you're using. The other thing that can go wrong, although it's a little bit harder on this machine, is when you have stitches hanging off the edge. When you have stitches hanging off the edge, generally, it means that you need to make some adjustments to your cutting width. And I'm going to have to kind of pretend that we're cutting and see if I can get the stitches to hang off the edge, because this machine generally does a pretty good job of making sure that we don't have that problem. So you can see it does a really good job of making sure that you don't have stitches hanging off the edge. But in the event that you ever do have that, what that means is that your cutting width is just a little bit too narrow, and you need to increase that. It happens a lot in knits, and we'll look at that in a little bit. All right, so let's look at what the 4 thread is really made for. The 4 thread has a lot of stitch, and it's made for knits. So let me go ahead and go back to N for neutral on our cutting width. And we'll go ahead and we're going to just sew off a knit seam. And I'm going to show you some settings that make this better. All right, here's our knit seam. It looks pretty good, but there is like a little bit of a bow to this seam, and you can see I've got some of the stitches that are, hanging off the edge a little bit. We're balanced. It did a good job at balancing, but it didn't quite do what we needed to do to make a good seam for knit. So, a couple of things that we need to adjust are this. We need to increase our cutting width for knits, because there's a little bit of stretch. So I'm going to go ahead and increase that just a little bit, because they're not hanging off the edge too much. So between 5 to 7, right about 5.5 to 6. The other thing I need to change is differential feed, and this is what differential feed is. Differential feed on a serger, go ahead and remove the foot so you can see, controls the feed dogs. The serger has 2 feed dogs. Here's the back feed dog, and here's the front feed dog. Okay, these feed dogs, generally, when you're setting for differential feed is on 1, they're feeding at the same speed. When you change that, this front feed dog feeds at a different speed, and there's reasons that you want to do that. If you increase your differential feed, you're going to cause this feed dog to feed twice as fast, or 1.5 times as fast, whatever you set this on, as this back feed dog. So it's going to be jamming that fabric into that back feed dog, and you're going to get some gathering. If you decrease your differential feed, what happens is you're going to not have this bowing that you see in this knit. Okay, it's going to feed a little bit slower than the back feed dog, stretching your knits out and giving you a better stitch quality. Now I'm going to go ahead and put the foot back on, and to do that, when you remove the feet on your serger, this has an extra high presser foot lift. So all I have to do is push this down a little bit, slide my foot in sideways, and just turn it so that I don't hit the needles, and put it underneath the little snap-on shank, and just lower that foot. There's a little button on the back to push, and it snaps on. All right, so we are going to adjust our differential feed down to 0.5. And I'm also, going to make sure that I've increased my stitch cutting width to about 6 to get a better quality on this knit fabric. So let's go ahead and sew this off again and see what happens. All right, here's my knit sample, and I still have a little bit of looping off the edge, so I would increase this all the way to 7. But I have a lot less bowing on this, and it's a very straight stitch.